Hello. I hope you're doing well. One of the things that we notice today in June, July of 2020 is that we live in changing and very dangerous times in terms of health-wise, in terms of social conflict, in terms of a type of depression and anxiety that can also result in people acting out. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, wrote this, "So that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights to the world." That was true in Paul's time, probably around the time he wrote that letter, maybe around AD 60, and it certainly applies to us today in 2020. What does it mean to live within a perverse and fallen and crooked generation? Well, it means believing that one can have fulfillment, living a life filled with thrills, filled with only looking out for oneself, not worrying about our neighbor, living a life outside of a relationship with Jesus Christ. Despite all the thrill-seeking, despite all the grasping after the wind, despite human pride, in the end, it dooms one to a life of disillusionment and despair. Because in the end, that is an essence of a world or a civilization that functions without the true God. We see this in a type of coarsening of the culture. Things that one might think of in private and blush, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, are now publicly stated with pleasure, with pride, with laughter. And we see that today on all sides of all debates. There's not one, to paraphrase Paul, who is without sin. We are all fallen. Andrew Jackson said this, "A man with courage, one man with courage, makes a majority." And that is true. One man or one woman with courage can make a majority. That means they can change things. And we see that throughout history. One individual can change things greatly. One person who did, and many of us may not know who this person was. He was a monk who lived in the 4th century. That would be in the 300s, from 300 to 399 AD. His name was Telemachus. And it shows how one person of faith and courage can change a coarsened, corrupted, depraved culture. Telemachus spent most of his life in a remote community of prayer, raising vegetables for the cloister kitchen. When he was not tending his garden spot, he was happily fulfilling his vocation of study and prayer. Then one day he felt the Lord leading him to go to Rome, the political center of the world. Telemachus wondered why God was drawing him to Rome. He didn't fit a bustling, wealthy city. Instead, he felt more comfortable in his quiet little cloistered community, a sheltered spiritual garden where his convictions were deepening and his faith in God was strong. But he couldn't fight God's direction, so he left. By and by he reached the busy streets of Rome, and what he saw stunned him. The people were angry and preoccupied. On one occasion, the bewildered monk found himself swept up by a crowd. Finally, he wound up in a place he didn't even know existed, the Colosseum, where animalistic gladiators fought, killed one another for little reason other than the amusement of the thousands that gathered in Rome's public stadium. He stared in disbelief as one gladiator after another stood before the emperor and said, "We who are about to die salute you." He put his hands to his ears when he heard the clashing swords and shields as one man after another fought to his death. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer. What in the world could he do? He was nothing. Still, he jumped up on top of the perimeter wall and cried, "In the name of Christ, forbear." He could not endure such senseless killing. "Stop this now." No one listened. They kept applauding the fight as it went on. Another man fell. Finally, unable to contain himself, he leaped down onto the sandy floor of the arena. What a comic figure he must have appeared to be. Of slight build, a small man in a monk's habit, dashing back and forth between muscular, brutal fighters. Again he shouted, "In the name of Christ, forbear." The crowd looked at him and sneered. One of the gladiators with his shield bumped him aside and went after his opponent. Finally, Telemachus became an irritation to the crowd, as well as the gladiators. Some in the stand began chanting, "Run him through! Kill him! Run him through! Kill him!" The same gladiator that had pushed him aside with his shield came down against his chest, opened his stomach with one flash of the sword. As Telemachus slumped to his knees, the little monk gasped once more, "In the name of Christ, forbear." Then a strange thing occurred. As the two gladiators and the crowd focused on the still form of the suddenly crimson sand, the arena grew deathly quiet. Then someone in the top tier got up and walked out. Another followed. All over the arena, spectators began to leave until the huge stadium stood empty. There were other forces at work, but that one innocent figure lying in the pool of blood in the sand of the Colosseum crystallized the opposition to the public games, and that was the last gladiator contest in the Roman Colosseum. I'll paraphrase what President Jackson said. One person with courage and faith in Christ can make a majority, can change a coarsening, crooked, and perverse generation. It happened then through Telemachus's martyrdom, and Christ calls us today to stand up to all we see around us today and basically say, "In the name of Christ, forbear." God be with you. May you have a wonderful day.